morning. I think that we'll, kick off with Chris kind of having some welcoming remarks and be able to do introductions. It's nice to see all these faces again. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you. Well, it's like old home week here. It's kind of exciting to be into phase 2 of this process. I think it's not only a continuation of what we built in phase 1, but it's really defining the accomplishments that we're going to achieve in phase 2, defining what our project goals are, and a draft purpose and needs statements for the EIS. In the EIS process, where a preferred alternative will be identified, we are committed to a transparent and open process, so this is a public meeting. We have a facilitator, and I think we're going to continue to use a facilitator as we go on to make sure that we're on time and we are actually following our process. And we appreciate the continued involvement and help carrying through the momentum of what we built in phase 1. And open discussion is very, very healthy. So make sure that we're all contributing our thoughts to this process. No thoughts are not allowed. And if we have an issue that we need to address, well, then let's get it on the table. Let's talk about it, and let's see if we can get it addressed. And if it needs to go to a technical committee or to a work group, then so be it. And we can work through that process. But we've shown in phase 1 that we can work together and that we can work out some really sticky problems, and therefore we're in phase 2. So we're funded to the tune of $4 million right now, and as we all know, we requested 4.9, and we do have a budgetary request going forward. We don't know what the status of that is yet until after the governor's budget is actually announced. So some more drama, as we're not unaccustomed to drama in our group here, so we're just going to go ahead and plot ahead. So let's go around the table and kind of introduce ourselves. So I'm Chris Lee, Director for the Department of Enterprise Services and representing the state.
I'm E.J. Zeta, Port of Olympia.
Jeff Dickinson, representing the Squaxin Island Tribe.
Pete Kamat, City of Tumwater.
Tessa Gardner-Brown with Floyd Snyder, supporting Enterprise Services and the project manager for the EIS.
Jesse Massengale with Floyd Snyder, also supporting Enterprise Services for stakeholder and agency coordination lead.
Susan Heyman, I'm with Enviro Issues and am here to provide facilitation support.
Cheryl Selby, Mayor of Olympia.
Commissioner Bud Blake, Thurston County.
So thank you. So I'm going to turn it back over to our facilitator.
All right, thank you. I will keep this short. Just wanted to, besides saying hello again, wanted to emphasize what Chris said. My job here really is to try to help you keep on time and on track. And if there's any just dynamics of your conversation that I might be helpful with to keep things productive and constructive, then I'll make some suggestions as we go along the way. And if we do need to make any adjustments in the agenda, then those are decisions that this group makes, not me, but I'll bring them to your attention if it looks like we're going over a little bit or under a little bit and can move on. The other thing to follow up just on what Chris said is we'll be keeping track of any action items, or if there are discussions that topics that you raise, I'll be sure to capture those so that we can follow up in future meetings. So we'll keep track of that as well. The meeting is being videotaped. I think you're accustomed to that, is my understanding, is that's how this group works. That's great for transparency. And we all love being videotaped, don't we? I think so. And I think Ray is zooming. Everybody Megan McClure is with Enviro Issues. She's over taking notes, so we'll have a summary of this. And again, Ray Outlaw with the project team and with Enviro Issues, doing all sorts of things with public engagement. So that's who we are. So for today, I have just 3 things noted that you're probably very accustomed. Just trying to work together respectfully and constructively today, and I would think there would be no no challenge I'll have with any of that. Really do want everyone's full participation, as Chris said. Really encourage you to have those candid and open discussions. And I'll encourage everyone to just be brief in either questions or responses so that we provide as much time for everybody to get in there. And then if you could just be sure that your phones are muted or anything else electronic you might have, then that would be terrific. Any question about that? Jeff, you look like you're thinking.
Well, recognizing that Bill McGregor is not here.
I'm
but-
assigned right here.
Okay. I just wanted to, so that's your ongoing representative?
I'm assigned, well, the chair of the Port Commission is assigned.
Okay.
I'm the chair this year.
Thank you. Just to
Okay.
clarify that.
Sure. Okay. Great. I think that was all I needed to do. You all have the agenda in front of you. You've probably had a chance to take a look at it. I think the way it's set up is there are topics followed by some Q&A and discussion. And so we'll just monitor that. And then if we do have some interest at the end of the meeting and folks want to make any public comment, we'll take a pause and just see where we're at with that. And then we understand the commissioner will have to leave at 9 today. So, and he assured us that we shouldn't be offended by that. So there we go. Yes?
One clarifying question. So I'm not familiar with the term or the company called Enviro Issues.
Mhm.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you got contracted with this?
Do you want me to do that or?
Yeah, go for it.
So Enviro Issues is a public outreach, public involvement, communications facilitation firm. We're based in Seattle. And so we're neutral to the issues and to the parties, and we're all about trying to help have a really robust, good public stakeholder engagement process. So that's what we do. And we're contracted with Floyd Snyder, and I'm come in to help with the facilitation, and Ray sits on the project team and really provides the public engagement
Okay.
component.
Great.
That's
Thanks for
all.
clarifying how you got here.
Sure, absolutely. Any other questions before? Okay,
That's it.
all right.
All right. We have a pretty packed agenda this morning. We have an hour and a half together. We so appreciate fitting this time into your schedules on a quick turn. Our plan and intent was to make sure we could meet with the executive work group in October during the scoping period. Ideally, we wanted to have it fall between the two public scoping meetings we'll talk about today, but it ends up that you guys are busy folks, particularly this month, and we were not seeing calendars align until the end of the month. And that would still be in the scoping period, but quite far into the scoping process, and there were various items we wanted to connect with you on early as we're really just starting the EIS. And that starts with scoping that began on September 26th. So we'll touch on this at the end of the meeting. We would love to get your guys' thoughts about meeting in late October so we can circle back and tell you what we're hearing in scoping and dive a little deeper into our public participation plan elements and kind of gain some input from you there. But we're kind of jamming a lot in this morning too. So because this was scheduled relatively quickly, the agenda just went out yesterday. In the future for our meetings, our intent would be to target getting you the draft agendas about a week in advance, just for you to review and make sure that we're covering everything that you guys see as important and have interest in. And that allows us that time to coordinate and then finalize. But in lieu of time with this first one, we kind of just got it out there. Go ahead.
So question, so what, the purpose of putting the draft agenda out to see if we've missed anything from our standpoints that should be added to the agenda, that's what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Jesse?
Yeah.
I appreciate your characterization of how this came about, but I want to personally thank everyone for making yourselves available on such short notice. You are, I'm sure, aware of the email that I circulated to all of you regarding one particular issue. And that was not the only issue that I had. One of them was, in fact, the failure to engage this executive committee earlier in the process to get more guidance from this committee as to some of the issues we have going into the EIS process, going into SEPA. And so at least in part, I'm not trying to take credit for it, but give you an explanation as to the reasoning. I was raising Cain behind the scenes, and in part, the immediacy of getting together here sooner than later in October was at least in part because of that. So again, I appreciate everybody getting together. We obviously have an item on the agenda that reflects one of the concerns that I have raised. And there's more of a background to that I can go into as we discuss that. Thank you.
Perfect. And I'll just say too, and then Chris, go to you as well. One of the other items that we have been able to talk with Jeff about, and that he did express concern, was the approach for participation in community outreach events. And so that's something we're going to talk about today as well on the agenda. So absolutely. Chris, did you want to make a point, and then we'll...
So I wanted to compliment Jeff because of the fact that whenever we have something that's bothering us, either as individuals or as governments, we should bring it up to the front. And Jeff has amply demonstrated the fact that we are a cooperative committee, that we listen to each other, and a concern for one should be a concern for all, and we should address those concerns. So I appreciate the fact that something was bothering Jeff. He brought it to everybody's attention, and here we are today. We're going to address it. So Jeff, thank you very much for bringing that to everybody's attention.
Absolutely. We'll start with the project name, as folks say. I will kind of tee that up and then turn it over to Jeff to express his concern, just to, you can do it firsthand, make sure I don't misconstrue anything, and then we can have a dialogue around that. And as folks see on the agenda, we'll spend a good chunk of time walking through a process map that you were provided in hard copy form and that's behind us. We have one of these in phase one. We love process maps. One piece of paper shows you everything, a visual aid. So we're going to do that and use that as our tool to talk through different elements, your role, the work group role, and particularly the approach for engagement. So we'll kind of go through that. We're going to touch on scoping today as well. We're not going to, again, dive as deep into that because we're hoping to have that late October meeting with you as well. All right, so let's get going here. So our first topic was discussion of the project name. And you'll see that on the header here and what we've used in the materials released to the public and representing the project to date for scoping, use the title Capitol Lake / Lower Deschutes Watershed Long-Term Management Project, EIS. It's a mouthful to get all that in. And we definitely recognize how excited we all are to be in phase two, the EIS phase. It is a new phase. Phase one built some foundational elements, but this is a fresh start and we move forward. So what I wanted to do is just remind all of us the origin of how we landed on the project name, and then bring it to the group to decide if you all are still comfortable with that, if you have input or want to discuss if we modify that name. If we are making a decision to modify the project name, we wouldn't do that until after scoping ends on November 8th, because we don't want to confuse folks. We have materials out there with one name. And scoping is where you'll hear more from Tessa today. We really take in a lot of input around the scope of the EIS, and it makes sense that at the end of that, when we are digesting that input and preparing a scoping report, we would make a change. So it doesn't have to be something we have to figure out today. We have some time to coordinate together and determine what we want to do. All right, so you know, as Chris described and Jeff referred to, he expressed concerns to us about this name, and I just wanted to kind of remind us of how this came to be. In one of our meetings in 2016, when we were talking about the draft purpose and need statement, which I see as maybe the best accomplishment of phase 1 to go into phase 2, we had a group team discussion around the name at that time for that purpose and need statement, and that we all recognize the public understands Capitol Lake as the current existing location name, but thinking about the EIS process, we wanted to recognize and acknowledge the greater watershed and the conductivity between the river, the lake basins, and Bud Inlet. But still be neutral and not necessarily reflect one alternative over another. So we had discussed and evolved recognizing the term watershed within the project name to not lose that connectivity and that larger geographical footprint. So that's where we landed on Capitol Lake / Lower Deschutes Watershed. That was kind of the origin and dialogue at that time. So that's for what it's worth, just to remind us there of that discussion in 2016. And then Jeff, I'll turn it over to you. And do you want to share your thoughts and concerns?
Sure. I would wade into this by first saying that I don't think that this is a singular issue, the name of this process. I see it as a series of issues and events that to the tribe represents a institutional and historical bias for how things happen with regard to this watershed. And that is reflected by the name, but there are other circumstances that play into that. So what I'm talking about is, Jesse mentioned the public participation. There was a certain amount of angst and give and take about the fact that when outreach was considered, it ended up being outreach at Harbor Days, but not at an adjoining estuary festival. And the discussion around that reflected the understanding that the tribe had been a sponsor of Harbor Days. Yet I would explain to you that that sponsorship has not gone smoothly. And in fact, the Kiwanis Club, we might as well just lay it out there, as being the name sponsor for Harbor Days.
And the event coordinators.
And where we tried to work together to co-publicize the two events, Harbor Days and the Deschutes Festival. Ultimately, Harbor Days resisted that attempt to work together. And this is, of course, after all the sponsorships are in place. And, you know, the tribe typically is not going to, in the middle of a situation like that, you know, pull back from the role that it has committed to. But there are a lot of ill feelings there about their reluctance and resistance to embrace both parts. And I can't predict what will occur going forward, but I think that represents the kind of bias I'm referring to. There's this inherent thinking about, you know, we want it this way. The traditions of Olympia, as they are represented by that particular service club, want to have it their way, and they were unwilling to yield to a new perspective. And I think that in this case, the consultants kind of got sucked right into that. And though they made attempts to reconcile that problem with us by providing literature, the amount of effort at the Deschutes Festival was certainly not the same as it was in Harbor Days. So you are, in effect, sampling a part of the population that has, kind of one perspective on the watershed area and the harborfront. So that is one point. The next point is that we enter into this process with the expectation that SEPA will be a neutral process. Now, that in itself is perhaps an anachronism, because in most cases, SEPA is not neutral. In most cases, the lead of a SEPA process for a project is an advocate of a certain project. And it's not an advocate of what are we going to do here next. It's an advocate of we want to build this development. We want to create this energy infrastructure. Or we want to do whatever. And they are literally an advocate for a certain outcome. So I'm not suggesting that SEPA is intended to be inherently neutral, but I think our expectation coming into this was that it would be, and that we worked diligently throughout the earlier stages of the process to get to a neutral position. And I would point out that the process has never been neutral. If you look at and you recall the tribe's perspective on the Royals House Center report, inherently biased. We objected to their approach and their questions, and we expressed our concern about that from the get-go, not to mention the fact that one of the prime advocates in the legislature at the time was a board member of the Royals House Center, and has a certain and very specific perspective on the outcome of this issue. So a bias. And then we move on to the proviso written by that same legislator, clearly biased to a certain outcome. However, I would mention that even in the proviso, it did mention the Deschutes estuary as an alternative.
Hey Jeff, pardon my interference here, interruption, but I think there are a lot of things that you're identifying that are going to be really important to discuss, and I think there are some other parts in the agenda where I think there'll be a little bit more detailed on that. So I know those are important things to cover. Can you go back to the name piece, just because I think that's first up, trying to figure that out, but I understand that you're providing a lot of context around the number of things, and the name is one of them, and there are other important things. So would it be all right to focus on that piece and then return to those other important parts?
I will when I get there, thank you. So again, the historical context of the steps we've been through has been one, in our perspective, that has been biased. So we get to the consultant selection process for this effort. You know, you've heard our concerns. We didn't particularly like the fact that the consultant selection process was entirely controlled within DES. You know, you get to a position where one agency, as it always has, controls the outcome. Now, and again, I'm not suggesting any concern about the outcome. We're perfectly comfortable with Floyd Snyder. But the fact that the process was all 100% entirely in the hands of one state agency that is, even at that, we tried to influence the thinking about the EIS and that maybe there should be two state agencies involved in co-leading. And that has not been. So we go through the consultant selection process, and we would hope to have an early activation of this executive committee to influence how things proceed with the early stages of the SEPA process. And we don't have that meeting. That meeting, you know, looks to be scheduled well into the process. In other words, multiple decisions have already been made. And the tribe's concern is simply that those multiple decisions, including any consideration of the name as it reflects alternatives, and don't fool yourselves, words are important. The name reflects the institutional bias toward capital A. When you look at the documentation presented for the process, you get to estuary in much smaller print way down the page. It's capital A. You know, I could be specific about attacking lower Deschutes Watershed, because I think that's an entirely vague term. I submit that if all of us tried to offer a definition of what the lower Deschutes Watershed is, we would probably get as many different answers as there are people around the table. Because most people don't know what a watershed is, or what a lower watershed is, and what that area defines. But yet it's clear that in this case, where an estuary restoration is a alternative in this, it is not given the same weight as Capital Lake is. Capital Lake starts right off from the beginning of the title. Capital Lake was built on the estuary, and we cannot forget that. So this is kind of how our concern has evolved, and it again is a reflection of a series of things. I'm not accusing anyone of being intentionally biased, but I'm suggesting that there is a long-standing, you know, I've been working on this for over 30 years, and I've seen this, you know, systematically along the way. There's an institutional bias toward the status quo outcome. And I would like to run a sword through it. So I'm raising that question right here about, you know, what it is we're intending to do, because I think it has to affect how we each participate, and, you know, from my perspective, how the tribe participates in the process. So there you have it.
I have a couple of thoughts. Thank you, Jeff, for going through that. But first, is there any initial input from other executives? And then I will touch on a few things.
So I have some thoughts. One is I appreciate everything that Jeff has said. And dealing with institutional bias is something that I'm so familiar with, working with the diversity subcap and seeing all the things that have happened to our minority population over the years. So I'm familiar with some of the things and some of the points that Jeff is making. There is importance in the name, I think, when you start talking and how you shape how people think about a particular set of circumstances. Let me apologize to all of you that I think that we should have formed the executive committee earlier and started meeting earlier. A oversight on my part that I will take full responsibility for. But now is how do we recover from this part? First of all, the decision-making piece of this and the meeting piece, so that we're better connected. I think that for us to be better connected, because I know coming up on the session where we're going to be really, really busy in these last months of the year, and then we're coming into legislative session, we're going to be ultra busy during that period of time. So what I'm hearing Jeff say is and Jeff, I hope you correct me if I'm incorrect with this assumption, is perhaps we should be meeting a little bit more often, maybe in shorter periods of time, maybe not an hour and a half, maybe it's an hour or half an hour, so that we have clarity on the subjects as they come to our attention, so that we can get connected with all the things that are going on. Maybe it's technical reports or work group reports that could affect decision-making further on down the line. But that would have to be based on everybody's availability. And I think all of you know what I'm talking about getting busy toward the end of this year and then in the beginning of legislative session, because we're in that biennial part of the year where budgets are going to be figured out. Especially busy, long session, etc. So I think that number one is I want to be supportive of the process. We have this facility if we need to. If it's not the right facility, I'm interested in making sure that we can accommodate everybody. And perhaps it's meeting in a different venue closer to wherever it's convenient for everybody to meet. So I want to be accommodating.
I think last time we went through this process, we would do these quicker check-ins, sometimes just with the conference call. So to be flexible around that, it's easier that people don't have to drive into the building.
By parking.
Yeah, so even offering up conference calls for people that can eke out the half hour, but not the hour it takes to get here, park, sit for a half hour and leave.
Okay.
So I hear part of Jeff's concern is about how much and how effectively we meet, but another part of the concern that I hear is the public process. So that's a whole another discussion. And the extent to which we have truly broad outreach. I confess that I apologize on the part of the port for concentrating our outreach on Harbor Days nearly to the exclusion of the State Chess Festival, despite the fact that we were invited to do outreach there. And that's an example of institutional bias. Regarding the name, I think that looking at the goal of each of our phases can be helpful in addressing this issue. As I understand it, the goal of phase 2 is to identify a preferred alternative. And the alternatives that rose up in phase 1 are Capitol Lake, a restored estuary, or a dual lake estuary, dual basin solution. So it's basically lake estuary or hybrid. So our goal in phase 2 is to identify a preferred alternative. The name of the Phase 2 effort right now is Capitol Lake, Lower Deschutes Watershed. And I'm wondering if one approach might be to say, what's the goal of Phase 2 and what's the goal of Phase 3? The goal of Phase 3 will certainly involve management of what was or maybe still is the lake and the Lower Deschutes Watershed. That may be an appropriate name for Phase 3. Phase 2, it may be appropriate to identify our preferred alternatives in the EAS.
That's interesting. One of the ideas that we have tossed around as well is, recognizing the geographic footprint, but also then incorporating the actual key alternatives, exactly what you said, because there's different sub-options, and we expect to hear more from the community during scoping, but you're exactly right, it's managed lake, estuary, hybrid of some sort. So one thought was reconfiguring the formatting presentation of the name to integrate, if that's a bullet or how we do that under the main title that says estuary / managed lake / hybrid. And that then people have that additional context to say, okay, this is an EIS project and there's the 3 primary alternatives. And that way we're recognizing the existing geographical footprint, but we're also acknowledging those 3 key primary alternatives. And folks then are seeing estuary, lake, and hybrid. Because to Jeff's point, you're right, typically an EIS project is evaluating impacts and potential mitigation measures around various alternatives where the individual, does have a specific project that they're evaluating the impact of. And in this process, we are advocates of the process itself. We want to be neutral. We want to make sure that people understand that we're neutral, that we're not advocating for a specific alternative. So that was one thing we thought about too, is if we identify the 3 primary alternatives, maybe that does then make sure that we are not misrepresenting the current name and geographical extent with the goal of where we want to land. Any thoughts on that? If folks would be comfortable, we can integrate the alternatives and have that to you to see what you think, or?
And you're not looking for a decision right now. You're just trying to get a sense for where people are thinking, and then take a look at that decision.
Exactly.
Are you suggesting that we bring names back to you and that we can discuss these?
I'm hearing her suggest a strategy for addressing this issue of the name, and the strategy is focused on what are the goals of Phase 2.
And identifying the alternatives so that folks do see the preferred alternatives, or the alternative, one of which we hope we will identify as preferred. So they would see the word estuary, managed lake, and hybrid, whichever they're personally engaged and vested in. And we can take the action item of reconfiguring the name and the logo, right? Because that's that continuity we have kind of on everything. And then bringing that back in front of the group with a couple options and say, what do folks think about that, and getting your input on it.
I like the idea of using the term managed lake versus capital lake, because capital lake kind of, for a lot of people, this nostalgia and this warm and fuzzy, like what it used to be, when in reality it's a managed lake. So by taking capital lake and changing it, I think that would help de-escalate a little bit.
Got it.
Calling it what it is.
Okay.
Are we constrained by the budget proviso in any way on this, the language of that? Just want to make sure that we...
I don't think
I
the
believe in the EIS name.
budget proviso mentioned anything
Okay.
about it at all.
About the name.
Yeah. I don't remember.
We can double check that too.
Well, I think if we just keep the same name, the bullets underneath, it really doesn't accomplish the goal that I hear Jeff talking about. So I really think, if you think about the title of the document, what is it covering. I think it needs to somehow capture the concept that we are looking at, in fact, estuary restoration as an option here, and managed lake, I guess. So I think, I don't have anything off the top of my head. I don't know if you have a suggested alternative name, Jeff. But it seems like what we've got now with just bullets underneath it doesn't accomplish what he's trying
Take
to
the
do.
capital lake off and just say lower Deschutes Watershed, restored estuary, managed lake, hybrid underneath it. That's what I thought I heard you say.
Yeah, I don't know.
So do you want to be doing this brainstorming, kind of thinking now, or we can capture some thoughts and have Floyd Snyder do a little bit more on this, come back to you, get more input? It's completely up to you, just, I know we're getting tight on time.
Let's see, Commissioner Blake, let's share your thought, and then Jeff, if you do have a suggestion or concept that you have in mind, and then we'll keep
I think we got the problem statement already done in terms of the title, using I prefer Floyd Snyder to go and come back with those options. That's what the executive committee is kind of designed for. But I understand the brainstorming piece, but it gives some guidance and stuff. But my piece was more for the output in terms of the outreach into the community. I think people need to understand that the name is important to them just as much as it is to any one of us sitting around this table trying to brainstorm it. I want to make sure that's involved too. And no matter where they're at in the county, rural or urban, they recognize it as part of the process too.
Got it. Anything that you were suggesting, Jeff?
No. In fact, it wasn't our intention to try to achieve a particular name change.
No, I didn't think that.
I think, again, going back to the SEPA analogy, you know, if some developer were building or wanting to build a project in Olympia or in Tumwater called Deschutes Passage, I hope I'm not stepping on somebody's trademark.
You're supposed to know about that.
But you know, if that were to be happening, they would be an advocate for their project, and the tribe would be a participant in SEPA, but not a participant in their process for their EIS. We would be just commenting on the scope, we would be raising points about their analysis. This is, I think, intended to be something different, where we are all engaged in the process. And that's what I really need to measure here and take back to the tribe. How are we going to participate in that process? Is it going to be one of collaboration of all these local governments to try to achieve an end? Or is it going to be to sit back while an agency advocates for a particular outcome and we'll still participate, just not in the same way? So that's what I'm trying to accomplish. It's not specific to, I want this name. So if that clarifies for anybody, I'm perfectly comfortable with you exploring some options, and I'm also perfectly comfortable with having phone calls to address issues along the way, so we can do it that way if we need to.
Okay. And we definitely do want that engagement. I mean, I think it's the perfect transition for us to go into the process map. I'm going to make quick time of that to make sure that I have a chance to hit the key items for you, but try not to talk too fast at the same time, which is what we fascinating. And then I think as we go through this, it will allow us to share our thoughts on how to be responsive to some of the input we've received from you early on, because we do want that true engagement and collaboration. And even if that means that we're having this dialogue and you're not advocating for a specific name change, we want to be responsive to the input and the guidance we're getting from you, and make sure that we're looking at everything holistically. All right, so here we go. Our process map. At the top in blue, you will see that is the EIS process itself. Our scoping notice began and was issued on September 26th. So right now we are in this yellow period, the scoping period that goes through November 13th. Sorry about that. That's an edit there. And what's important to note here is that what you are seeing in blue at the top, as well as a couple public meetings, is all that is required under SEPA, our state regulation, in terms of public comment and public involvement. Everything else you're seeing on this piece of paper, all of the green, the orange, and then additional components I really want to touch on today about community engagement, is what DES is proposing as going above and beyond, because we recognize the long-standing interest in the future of Capitol Lake, the management of Capitol Lake, and the issues that are complex and warrant additional outreach. And we have the wonderful opportunity with you all and the technical work group and the funding and governance work group people to be willing to give their time to this process, to engage and reconvene and continue to provide guidance and brainstorming. So in blue, at closure of the scoping period, you'll see, and Tessa will touch on this in a minute, and the milestone of that process is issuance of a scoping report. That's where we've taken in this input we've received that shapes what is studied in the EIS. And Tessa will touch on this more. That tees us up in 2019, in early 2019. We're thinking that scoping report is issued in the January or first of the year. It allows us to proceed into the technical evaluation and the alternatives analysis. That real chunky technical work that feeds into and is the draft EIS document, evaluating alternatives, the impact of alternatives, and those potential mitigation measures to offset the impact. So we have preparation of the draft EIS later this year, and in 2020, issuance of the draft EIS document. And you'll see at the bottom of the page a yellow circle that reflects a draft EIS public meeting. There's also two on your lower left circles that are in yellow that are the scoping meetings, public meetings around scoping right now. And we have that information to you, and we will discuss that today as well, and an online open house. So those are the public meetings consistent with SEPA that tie to these milestones in EIS. And then after receiving input on the draft EIS, public comment, and the work group, advisory work group's input, we would proceed to issue the final EIS. And so those are kind of the major EIS milestones. What I want to do now is skip the green for just a minute, the advisory work groups where you all come into play, and jump down to the lower portion of the process map where we can touch on how we report out in briefings and to the public, and we also solicit additional input. So we have various briefings occurring to the decision-making bodies. As you guys know, Capitol Lake is not a standalone geographic footprint piece of land. There is a body of decision-making around the Capitol Campus Design Advisory Committee, the State Capitol Committee, and of course the legislature itself. So we have briefings occurring on about a quarterly basis so that we can dovetail and fit into existing schedules that folks have, recognizing, the legislative session and what happens there. And that also ties to kind of the key milestones. So that's what you're seeing in orange. If we jump below, when we get into community engagement, the gray color, that's where what you're seeing here is some of the yellow shapes that indicate specific public outreach or public meetings. So you'll see the early outreach at Harbor Days, as Jeff referred to in September. We were under contract in July and getting moving. We wanted to take advantage of an early outreach opportunity that draws good local involvement to communicate about the upcoming scoping period. we were not aware of the underlying dynamics between the tribe and different groups and some of the tensions at play there. To understand the additional layer of involvement and knowledge that you all have within the community and your constituencies, and also to recognize the feedback we received from Jeff, our thought moving forward, because a key part of the EIS is public involvement and making sure that we provide equal opportunities for engagement. Our thought, how to best tap into your guys' pulse of the community and some of those dynamics we might not be aware of, is that prior to our potential participation in outreach opportunities, we would want to come to this group and talk and have a discussion around events and see and have a discussion around benefits of participating in outreach opportunities and also some considerations, and understand if you have a sense of those dynamics and really evaluate what is the best use of our outreach time and dollars. We have to think about the team's capacity and bandwidth, all the logistical considerations and budget, and how it ties to milestones. But that way we really can benefit from what Jeff was describing, as he knew those dynamics and we were not aware that that tension was occurring. So one thing we would love to ask is that between this meeting and when we hope to meet again in late October, we will on our end think about what upcoming community events might be opportunities for us for outreach over the next 4, 6, 9 months, and then see if you guys are aware of events as well that you could share with us and tell us about in late October, so that then we can look at everything and really assess what is the best balance of achieving that outreach and providing equal opportunity. So we want to make sure that we take advantage of this time we have with you for that goal as well. So that was one element of it. Any initial questions?
So what I'm hearing you say is you want us to come back to the next meeting and make sure that we're talking to our staffs about what events that we should include in this from our perspective, our community perspective. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yep, and we will, draw from our knowledge too of events so that we can say, oh, we didn't know about that one. What do you think about these two? And have that discussion and figure that out. So yes, your homework item.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, that's your homework. We have one you.
Okay, good.
I've got one suggestion.
Sure.
That would probably solve a lot of that, what you just asked us to do, is just to call Visitors and Convention Bureau.
Okay.
Experience Olympia and Beyond. That office has every festival all over Thurston County.
Oh, awesome.
And then maybe you bring a list back to us and we could say, okay, that's worthwhile, that's worthwhile, that's worthwhile. And then figure out your time, capacity, and
how that ties to milestones. Okay.
a lot of them start in the spring.
Perfect.
I'm thinking of the Wooden Boat Festival.
Cheryl, would they have any special events that are going on in the communities? I mean, they list everything.
Everything. Okay.
So Visitor and Convention Bureaus, I've got that.
Yes, call Experience Olympia and Beyond.
Okay.
Sure, in addition to that, in respect to all the jurisdictions, the county rural portion tends not to receive that information as well sometimes because they're out doing other things. I want to be a conduit for that, to be able to have that, to be all four corners of the county in the outlying areas. And so use the county for that. They come to the courthouse a lot of times to be able to get their information. In addition to the DCD, I want to make sure everybody in the county has access to it. So
Got it.
whatever we can do to figure that out, that would be great.
Okay. Perfect.
As well, there's doing programs for the Kiwanis groups. So they keep them on the process, the Rotary groups, the Get Downtown Alliance. Those are all important influencers.
Perfect.
Jeff, from a tribal perspective, is there anything else we should be looking at from either the cultural committees or anything that we don't know about currently?
I'll have to get back on that. I'll need to consult. There's our cultural people and our outreach people are kind of a little different shop than me, so I'll get back to you on that.
The other part I want to make sure to describe before I know that you need to get going, for community engagement, as folks know, there are many stakeholder groups, interest groups that are really passionate and have long-standing engagement in the management of the Capitol Lake area. And what we heard, from day one was folks wanting to have the opportunity to engage. And whether that be newer individuals or some of these folks that we're really familiar with. So what we have done is part of our additional community engagement, there's two elements. One element is providing briefings and sit-down meetings to interest groups. And these are interest groups with that long-standing participation and connectivity to this project, the Capitol Lake, evaluation of alternatives. Thank you, Commissioner Blake. And also making sure that those interest groups represent a diverse range of community perspectives. And so we have already started in some of those interest group briefings. That's a chance to communicate out and share information like we are today. Here's the purpose of the EIS, to help inform decision-making, develop plans, assess impacts of alternatives, and also hear from them what's at the front of their mind for the process. So what we have started with is interest group briefings now, and then also anticipate having those briefings as part of the outreach period when the draft EIS document becomes available for public comment. The interest group briefings are meetings with groups like CLIPA, DIRT, LOT, the Recreational Boaters Association, Thurston County Chamber of Commerce,
Olympia Downtown Alliance.
Olympia Downtown.
We reached out to them. We don't have one scheduled, but we're hoping that they would be interested in the opportunity.
Yep. And they are scheduled this week, next week, so we're kind of in the heart of that right now. And the first one was yesterday afternoon.
Yep, that's right. We met with CLIPA yesterday evening at a conference room that they have at the port. And again, as Jesse mentioned, the purpose was really to inform them about what is an EIS, what is a scoping period, how can you effectively comment during scoping. We understand that these interest groups really have their own body of literature and they have their own interests that they want to make sure are considered as part of the EIS, and so we want to help them channel that energy to be most effective, and really to give them the opportunity to ask questions about the process because they're interested and they're engaged.
Yep. And I think this afternoon is the interest group meeting with DIRT.
Yep. And I was just going to say that that CLIPA they were very happy about the meeting yesterday, very appreciative, and we hope that that's really the tone of the meetings going forward.
And then the other element of the additional community engagement I want to describe, and then I think that's a good spot to see if you guys have thoughts and questions before we go into the work group discussion, is this concept that we're showing here as community sounding board meetings. And so these would be, we anticipate some of the same interest group folks, those entities that represent diverse community perspectives and interests with a long-standing engagement in the project. And our thought on this concept is we would be able to meet with this community sounding board and have a dialogue around key components of the technical evaluation and work to be done as part of the draft EIS. And then we can have those discussions, gain the knowledge and thoughts that they have and want to share, and bring that up and back to the executive work group to share with you and then further discuss that. And so you'll see that we have this connection between the community sounding board meetings and then the work group meetings that will happen throughout 2019. And so those things include the measurable evaluation criteria, how we evaluate various alternatives, technical analysis and design considerations, and also potential mitigation measures, those things that the community has the most interest in. So it would allow one more mechanism for us to make sure that we are again, fully engaging stakeholders and then sharing that information back to the work groups. The work groups are defined for us as advisory work groups, where we come to you with key issues, key questions, and seek guidance and input from the various levels, executive, technical, and then funding and governance. So our expectation in working with you guys, in particular, is that we get the chance to bring these sticky topics and opportunities to be creative in this process to you, get that input, and then see if we discuss and reach a consensus on how to proceed and how to address various components in the EIS. The work groups aren't something that will be voting. We'll follow the EIS process, but be able to have it more enriched with this additional layers of engagement. So I'm kind of going at a quick clip watching our time, but I want to pause there. Any initial feedbacks, questions, comments, concerns?
Where is it that alternatives are identified in this? Where's the process for input on, alternatives?
Oh, great question. Do you want to describe kind of scoping and how that transitions?
Is that where it's going to be covered?
I can jump right into it.
Before we do that, just
Yeah.
a reminder, you probably said this already, but
Oh, yeah.
community sounding board, have these people been chosen?
No, we have not done that yet. We wanted to connect with the executive work group first and see what you guys thought about the community sounding board. As part of the interest briefings, we've said it's a potential that might be used and shared, and anticipate to share and ask those interest groups if they would be interested in participating in a community sounding board. But we recognize that this is dynamic and exactly the kind of thing that we want to see what you guys think about.
I would,
I was just going to do a quick check, and I know you're watching the time too, but we've got about 25 minutes left, so I know we've kind of combined
I'm merging them here. I hope
the
we're
project
doing okay,
overview and the EWG involvement in the EIS. So, okay, so then we're kind of slipping into the scoping and then just trying to get,
Yeah.
Interactively get feedback. Okay,
Exactly.
great, thank you.
Question about the community sounding board.
Yeah.
They are not one massive group that you're going to be meeting with, but they're individual groups you're going to be meeting with. Is that correct?
It's a great question. We anticipated that it would be a roundtable discussion. We may cap the participation at around 14 or 15. We would be very careful about having equal representation of interests across the seats that are offered. And we want to use the scoping period to see who comes forward with interest for such an activity, and who's really showing that they're engaged and would like to be engaged at that level. And then from that group and from the existing groups that are engaged, kind of whittle that down, and again, ensuring that it's fair across the board.
But to your question, you're right, there is a distinction here. The interest group briefings are one at a time with each interest group, just a focused with Lot or Dirt or Clipper, whoever that may be. The community sounding board, we think, is most effective and beneficial to have representation, as Tessa described, from the various interest groups at one table, so that they are hearing firsthand the dialogue and it is more of a collaborative discussion, recognizing that there is absolutely diverse interests. But that's our chance to have those people speak as a group. So that is the difference there.
Back to Pete. Pete had something back in the agenda.
About alternatives. Do you want to touch on that, Tessa? And then-
Well, actually, before you go into the alternatives, which I think is the next block or something. These multiple meetings, I would request that you can keep a roster of all these meetings that are regularly distributed to us,
Okay.
so that we can keep track, but also direct people to certain opportunities. So I'm including in that all of these things that are both down on your public involvement, like the community sounding board meetings, but also these briefings that are part of the bigger process, the CDAC, the SEC,
Got it.
just kind of a full roster of all these meetings going forward so that
And we do,
can track them.
I think that's a great suggestion. I don't think our current website is showing some of these briefings. We are making quick time. I know Reagan Enviro Issues has already updated the website content to identify the meeting today, to identify the technical work group and the funding and governance work group meeting scheduled in October. And so we will continue to do that, but make sure that it's comprehensive with everything, and we can always provide the executives a distilled down, here's the roster of everything that's on the books.
Okay, and I'm requesting that you send that out to us.
Yep, that's what I was just saying.
Not just on a website.
Yep, that's what I'm saying, but distill down and.
That may be just my idiosyncracy, but, you know, I've got
Yeah.
all these things vying for my attention.
Yeah.
Unless I see it thrown in front of me, I'm not gonna have time to go
No,
find it.
absolutely, and that's something that we have to keep track as well, so it's easy for us to send out a file and make sure we do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't phase one, we also had a calendar? Did I probably, I just probably made that up in my mind, I don't know.
You're right.
The process manual.
Just, okay. One last comment, and then I'll get Pete had his question answered. As far as your community sounding board,
Mhm.
something that I think is, there's a lot of things that end up missing at a lot of these meetings, and one of them is youth. I mean, it's going to, we need people in their 20s and 30s at this table. They're going to be the ones that are going to see this kind of work follow through. It's going to impact their children, their grandchildren. I mean, in some cases, a lot of us are going to be gone before this thing gets resolved. Hopefully not. But, so getting young people and people of color and all people of, all income strata, we tend to have the same people showing up to a lot of these meetings. I know we do at the city whenever we try to do community outreach. So youth, people of color, I mean,
Social media.
social media. Oh, engage through social media.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Snapchat?
If you want to go to
Exactly,
those people,
Facebook
Yeah.
you gotta
page, yeah.
Well, yeah,
That's
the tools that
exactly.
they-
Yes,
We have
exactly.
a social media strategy that we are working with Enviro Issues and DES behind, so that it's not, we're trying to cover all bases in terms of hard materials, because some people want to see, a postcard or a flyer.
Right.
And to Commissioner Blake's point, discussions with him and saying in rural areas, they're not maybe checking Facebook all the time,
Right.
but that flyer being at a specific location
The
might be
libraries or
helpful.
whatever,
Yep.
yeah.
And then in other cases, really capitalizing on, everyone is using technology and being able to use various mediums, so
It might be
absolutely.
cool to do a joint assembly with Olympia High School and Capitol High School.
And that's, I just totally am encouraged by that comment, because that's something that we are looking into. I'd love to give credit to Deborah and Carrie, the project managers, about their interest in that engagement, and are there opportunities at the draft where we can get that younger age group involved, younger demographic, and we've had some requests for involvement of that type during the scoping period, and we're recommending come to the scoping meetings. We'll have the opportunity to talk with you there. You can see this
Extra
play
credits,
out.
extra
and-
credits.
Exactly, and so that's something that we're tuned into, and we're looking for opportunities.
Thanks.
You have a standing invitation at college.
Thank you.
I think that's okay, so I think now, Tessa, will you describe going into the scoping report and alternatives to provide that information? It's on our agenda, so we're crossing them off, but also to address, yeah, we're getting there.
Right around tracking, yes.
Yeah, start now?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it.
Perfect. Okay. So to back up just one step, as Jesse mentioned, our contract officially began in late July. We worked in August to put startup, on project startup activities. That's like project management plan, just sort of the infrastructure that we use as part of our team. And then scoping began last Wednesday. So in September, it's been a very, aggressive drive to make sure that we are engaging the public before the holidays, and that we're coming back to the legislature demonstrating progress as they get into the legislative session. So those have been big drivers for this schedule. As I mentioned, scoping started officially on Wednesday of last week. That was September 26th. The purpose of scoping is to solicit comments from agencies, tribes, the community interest groups on what we should consider as we develop the scope of an EIS. So it's well named. We're in the scoping process to develop the scope of the environmental impact statement. We really look for 3 key areas for these entities to comment. Those are alternatives. Are there other alternatives that should be considered? Are there tweaks to alternatives or sub-options? Impacts. What areas of the environment could potentially be impacted in a significant level, and what should we study related to those impacts? And then potential mitigation measures to reduce those impacts. So those are the 3 key comment areas. Scoping is typically a 21-day window in an environmental impact statement process. Enterprise Services is committed to more than double that. They're going forward with a 48-day comment period that ends on November 13th. We'll update this map. And the transparency in that process, they've also committed to transparency in that process. So the comments that we receive in that 48-day window will be available on our project website for the community and everybody to see. When we began scoping, we had intended to cast a very wide net, so we developed a project website. It's listed on the process map and on all of our materials.
That was in the email that was sent to you as well.
Yep, exactly. We have flyered over 100 locations in the Olympia, Tumwater, and Thurston County areas. We sent an email to our existing mailing list of 5,000 email addresses. We also have Facebook ads and Twitter. And so our intent is to really make sure that we're painting the town and people know this is your time to influence the process, to let us know what we should consider. At the end of the 48-day window, we work as a team with the work groups to analyze those comments and to understand themes of those comments. And our work product at the end of that is a scoping report. The scoping report will describe the alternatives that we heard from the community that should be identified, and will include, at a minimum, the 4 primary alternatives: the restored estuary, the hybrid option, the managed lake, and a no action alternative, which is required in an EIS. It's the baseline that we compare. And it'll also include other key themes that we heard, key themes around impacts, key themes around mitigation measures, and it'll outline or define the scope of the environmental impact statement. So that is issued in early 2019. I guess the last thing that I'll say as part of that process is that we have also a very robust approach to soliciting comments, and the community, we would ask your agencies to, the tribe, to submit comments online, via email, mail, and we also have 2 in-person public meetings. The first one is scheduled for next Wednesday, October 10th, at Hotel RL, the old Red Lion. And then about a week and a half until the next meeting, which is at the Washington Center for Performing Arts. The times for those will be the same, 5:30 to 8:30. And there will be 2 opportunities to engage. One is an open house format, where we'll have boards like this and staff that the community can come in and ask questions to us to help understand what they would like to know and how they would like to comment. We will also have an opportunity for a public hearing, and there will be a mic, and the community can get up at the mic and provide their comments. We'll take verbal testimony, we'll also take written testimony. So this is all to say, this is our process to understand, collect all that input, and then work with you to really define the scope of the EIS.
How will the verbal testimony appear in the records? So are we going to translate that to the records? How's that going to happen?
Yes, we'll have a court reporter at the meetings, and we'll put those transcripts online.
And we'll have a lottery system for fairness. of, to your point, Cheryl, to make sure that maybe if there were, you know, what was great in phase one is there were a handful of meetings where different classes, school classes came or organizations, and so we want to have a lottery system so that we do have the opportunity to hear from folks that maybe wouldn't necessarily have that chance per se, you know, or that are new to the process. As much as we want to recognize the long-standing involvement, we want to reach beyond that and also catch people that are new to the area that just moved here maybe or
Don't understand what's going on.
yeah, they're like, what? So all of that, but
So I don't know if this is drilling down on Pete's question, but somewhere in this process of scoping, you're going to need to make decisions about what alternatives, if you will, rise to the level of further analysis. So we've got the subset that we have been talking about, but you know, there may very well be other proposals made out there in the process. You know, like a hybrid of the hybrid, and you know how you can have all these iterations. At what point, and well, I guess I know the point, but how do you expect to make the decisions about what gets further analysis and what does not?
Yep,
Go
I can take
ahead.
that. So the scoping report will outline what we heard, as you said, there, if there's, you know, variations of variations or whatever, and so we'll document that there. And then I'm gonna stand up here. This right here, in sort of the end of quarter one, we will work with you and also with the technical working groups to define measurable evaluation criteria. And the purpose of those criteria is to help us evaluate that list of alternatives. And then we can move forward in a structured process to say, does this variation of a variation of a variation measure up against these measurable evaluation criteria and therefore should be analyzed in further detail in the environmental impact statement? If the answer to that is yes, it moves forward for further analysis. If the answer is no, we've documented that it's been through that fair process using measurable evaluation criteria that we all have agreed to, and it stops at that
doesn't
point.
proceed. Exactly. And so to that gets us to the frequency of our engagement and meetings with you and kind of circling back, which is not a bad place to land here. We're covering everything. So one of the things, to Tessa's point too, is so what we've shown with meetings is meeting with the work groups on, perhaps this was our draft schedule, right, on a quarterly basis. That we would meet with you in October, which is ending up twice in October. We're making the pitch at the end to ask calendars at the end of October, twice in October. And then meeting with both the executive work group and technical work group, like Tessa was saying, prior to issuing the scoping report, so that we can have a dialogue around what we're hearing and figure out how best to document and move forward. Our anticipation then is that we are getting moving and meeting with you again early in Q2 of 2019, that each of these meetings will really have an action-packed, dense agenda. Like, they're going to be meaningful, right? We're not just asking, how have you been? You know, how's your holiday? Like, it's going to be dense to talk about the measurable evaluation criteria. And again, we feel so fortunate in this process to have that technical work group, those entities that have been through the EIS before, so we're garnishing their knowledge and input, and then bringing that back to you and saying, hey, here's where we're at, here's what our team's experience has come up with as well, and vetting that. So I guess going back to the discussion earlier, and one of the things we really did want to ask today, if having, you know, 2-hour meetings, because we kind of need that much time to work through some things, makes sense to you all on a quarterly frequency, and then perhaps we're trying to slip in calls in between, or did you already have expectations on the frequency of meeting? You'll see in this really quick that we've detailed this out through 2019, not provided that same detail for 2020 and the early part of 2021, thinking we would flesh that out as we get further into 2019 and we know where we're at in time. But does a quarterly with maybe check-in calls sound right to you guys?
Yeah, I think there has to be enough time for you to actually do some work.
Yep.
This is true, yes.
I do have a question back on alternatives, though, and that is, in the process we just went through, we identified, and we did, community outreach and get alternatives identified. Are those like automatically forwarded as part of this process, or do people have to go back and repeat that in order to include them?
Great question. We wanted to make sure there was a one-stop shop for everybody to know what those alternatives were. That's included in an alternatives report that's available on the website for everybody to see during scoping. We anticipate that we would take that report with us into this meeting and look at those against measurable evaluation criteria. So that doesn't have to be repeated. We'll understand whether it moves forward for further analysis or not. We'll take all of that input forward. I would say that I expect some of those proponents would modify. We're seeing that they're suggesting they're modifying their alternatives or tweaking them, and that's just part of the scoping process. We see how these alternatives evolve and what the community comes up with.
Okay,
And
but
so-
those will be carried forward.
That's right.
Okay.
So that alternatives report and memo recaps basically what came out of phase one, so that folks can understand that. And it's their roadmap of what was phase one and how did we get to where we are.
Okay.
How often are the technical groups meet?
That's a good question. We're meeting next week with the technical work group. A similar discussion of, does this frequency feel right to you, given what else you have in play? And right now, we're showing the technical work group meeting about the same frequency on a quarterly basis. We think that the funding and governance work group might have a greater time between when we initially meet and letting us do some additional work. And just to remind folks, DES made an early commitment coming out of phase one and recognizing the interest from the stakeholders and communities to include an economic analysis within the EIS, which is not required either, but we all understand how important that is to the evaluation of alternatives.
And you had an economic analysis in phase one. That's a good starting point.
We did some work, but this will really, we had a little bit of recapping of costs. This will have a full assessment of the economic impact of various alternatives and be able to get, again, guidance from those members of the funding and governance work group on some of that as well. And our own teaming partners that have expertise and do economic analysis for evaluation of project alternatives. So I know we're throwing a lot at you right now this morning.
Does the EIS include any money for doing any kind of further field work at all?
Yes, that's a great question. So right now, one of the things that people might ask is, will you evaluate X, will you evaluate Y in the EIS? Part of that is to some extent to be determined because we really genuinely want to see what comes out of scoping. But we also have all of the defined discipline reports we know we will look at. And I think from all of our continuity in phase one and some of us reaching much further back on the project, we know that there's certain areas that there's differences of opinions on technical items, and that might warrant additional data collecting activities or information that informs the technical analysis to be performed with the EIS. So that is included in the process.
Yeah, it seems to me the two most apparent are the amount of sediment that's accumulated, because that keeps changing, so we probably need to have a more updated
It's an old number, yeah.
number on that.
Yeah.
And then, the continuing criticism has been the lack of water quality data, so hopefully we can fill some holes there.
That's exactly right.
Although I don't fully expect a complete full-blown water quality study of lower bud inlet in the lake, but I
But
think
that's
we've got to
exactly
have
right.
enough sampling to get a sense of updating that information.
I would like to say that these are perfect scoping comments.
Just waiting for that.
Cheryl, and then I do want to close with two things, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I just, no answer needed today, but people are asking, why do we need the extra $900,000? So that's going to be something we need to have some messaging around, why we're going back to the legislature. So what that would get us, and when do you need us to be advocates for that? So I don't need that answer now, but maybe in our next meeting.
It's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Cheryl. Okay, so two things. One, what we'd like to do in the future in meetings when we do have a little bit more time, I would love for us to close the meeting with just a roundtable feedback. And that can be, we don't have time today, unfortunately. We have 3 minutes, but in the future being able to say, do you have any feedback or thoughts on the content today, moving forward, just the universe of the project, whatever that may be. We'd like that to have a standing role in our meetings together to make sure we can hear from you, and always be nimble and responsive to input that folks have. And then the other item is a logistical one. I wanted to ask your preference on how best to schedule our future meetings. And the first is late October, so that presents the most challenge because it's the closest. We can go ahead and take a best shot on guessing our, January type meeting and work with your assistants to get on your calendars for that. Where we're at for possible dates for this late October meeting, I just want to throw 4 days out there in case you already know, oh my gosh, I'm gone, and we'll rule that out. So I'm being sneaky since I have you here. October 25th, October 29th, October 30th, or November 1st are 4 potential days, depending on your availability.
What was the third one?
The October 30th and the 1st.
Thank you.
I would throw out maybe on the 25th, 10 to noon, something like that.
So that's a morning that there's the RIRA 13 meeting, so a lot of the people who might be interested in this might very well be involved in that.
Be conflicted, okay.
Particularly technical staff.
Got it, this is perfect. And then October 29th is a Monday. We could do a morning meeting or an afternoon meeting. Any?
I could do afternoon on the 29th.
Ooh.
I'm good all day.
Mayor's.
That looks good.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Oh, we don't have Bud here.
We don't have Bud. And Mayor commit. And I have your schedule, Chris. I got it from Lindsay. She's wonderful. So you're locked in. Don't even try to say you're going. Okay. Let's see if the window is pretty big there that we think might work collectively for our group and Chris, anywhere between 1:30 and 5 on the 29th. And
Earlier is better.
Earlier in the afternoon is better for me.
Yeah, earlier in the afternoon. Okay, so we might see it like a 1:30 to 3:30.
That would be good.
All right, I'm just gonna ask, just in case that doesn't work for Commissioner Blake, what does October 30th look like?
This early I could do.
If it was early?
Tuesday.
No go for Commissioner Zeta, thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah, morning would work for me.
Okay, let's ixnay that one. 'Cause we need you. And then last, November 1st.
Afternoon.
No.
I can just do morning.
Well, I can
Actually,
do
I-
morning, but I'll be a zombie.
So we might bring coffee and tea
Is
that
that because you're waking up from Halloween?
Yeah.
That's what I thought she meant.
I know.
So is November 1st liable?
I can do
Or
the
not?
morning.
Maybe in the morning, but we will prefer, we're gonna go for the 29th and hope that works for Commissioner Blake, because that works out pretty great that everyone else is a 1:30 to 3:30 slot. Okay. In the future, are doodle polls a pain for you guys? Would you rather?
They're great.
If they're okay?
Yeah.
It's the easiest way just to see where things stack. Okay, we might use that then, but with enough heads up that we're not planning 2 weeks in advance. It's a ways out. Okay. Okay, we will reach out to Commissioner Blake's assistant and we'll do that today and see if we can get on his calendar. Okay.
And before you completely wrap up, do you want to do a quick check to see if there's any public comment?
Yes, I should state that also one of the things we want to commit to, again, being responsive to feedback from the community is that, I think I mentioned this, the work group meetings are all open to the public. And then at the end of the work group meetings, whether that's executive, technical, whatnot, we would provide an opportunity for members of the public to comment if they had general comments on that meeting content or whatnot. So, yes, are there anyone from the public that would like to comment? Maybe not today. Randy?
I am not the member of the public, but I'm going to take a shot here in my promotional capacities. So we have flyers, we have posters, we have Facebook posts, we have all this information out there. We're trying to get people to a concert, an event that they may not know about and may not be compelled by the bright colors, the blue and the orange. If you want posters, flyers, we have some outside that you're welcome to take. We would love for you to take them and share them with people that you work with, that you're close with. If you have communication staff that are on Facebook, Twitter, you could retweet, repost the agency's Facebook post. That would be a huge help. If you have any other ideas, thoughts, I would love to hear them, not today necessarily because we're out of time, but at any point in the future.
Thank you, Randy. Absolutely. Okay, we have some homework items on our end. Think about if there's engagement opportunities you'd like us to be aware from. We will come forward with a list and can vet a few with you at late October.
We're trying to schedule you for one of our study sessions.
Yes, that's exactly right. We've been coordinating a bit with Steve Hall. And so I think that it's looking like we might be participating in the city's study session on October 23rd, and they would like to invite all of the other executives as well. And we anticipate that it is a briefing, I will talk not as fast as today, but a briefing out like what we've been doing for the CDAC. And at that point, we will have already completed our public scoping meetings, and so we will be able to share some of how those were attended, what we were hearing, things like that. Yeah. Thank you so much again for fitting this in. Thank you for being candid and sharing your thoughts. Thank you, Jeff. Remember holding back? We appreciate it. It really does. It makes it a better process. It really does. All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Do you guys have a